I can see that we are live. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you have joined in from. Uh, we are very excited to have everyone in today's interesting topic which we have on our hand. We have multiple industry experts joining in this panel, and we will be discussing about various issues that and challenges that procurement professionals are facing in this day and age. And apart from that, we will also be throwing some light on uh, how organizations are implementing AI and generative AI in their procurement value chain. So that is what we have on our agenda today. Uh, I will quickly look at where everyone is joining in from. So maybe we can take a minute or so to see. I hope that, yeah, I would urge the uh, audience to share where they are joining in from in the comment section, so that we also know what are the various audiences that we're catering to today. By the way, I am joining in from Bangalore, India. Amy and are joining in from the US, and Simon is joining in from Ireland. So we have all the major geographies covered. I see on the panel. Okay, great. Then what we will do is I'll quickly let everyone know about what are the various things that we are going to discuss in the LinkedIn Live today. So the as I mentioned, we will be discussing about the multiple challenges that procurement and supply management executives are facing, and how they can leverage AI-enabled solutions to resolve these problems across various procurement activities such as spend analytics, sourcing, contracting, supplier risk and relationship management, and also in the downstream side of procurement, accounts payable, procure to pay, etc. So I guess we can quickly move towards hearing from our speakers, and I will hand it over to Amy now to introduce herself, and there we can take it from there.
Sure.
Amy,
Thanks,
over to you.
Amit. Thank you to our guests for being here as well. Amy Fong, I lead our sourcing and vendor management programs at Everest Group. Been around the supplier management, outsourcing, and sourcing space for quite a while in a couple different roles: practitioner, consultant, analyst, advisor, and excited to be here. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area, which happens to be where I am this week. So as Amit said, we've got a lot of major cities covered throughout the globe. Let me hand it over to Nick, and really happy to have Nick Heinzman here from Zip. Go ahead and you can introduce yourself, Nick.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So, hi there. My name is Nick Heinzman. My role is head of research at Zip. I spent a lot of time in the market talking with other researchers, including Everest, as well as customers and people looking at Zip to really figure out the direction in the industry, where things are going, and also advise on everything from how we position our orchestration solution, as well as guiding new innovations in the product side as well. So looking forward to the discussion, as this is obviously a big one for a lot of people as we look at the future of not only procurement technology, but how people are running their organizations today.
Simon, if you can also introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Simon Weefel. I'm the Negotiation Analytics Director in BT Source. I've been here for the last 3 years in the European tech capital of Dublin. And I'm looking forward to sort of hearing out what other companies are doing on implementing sort of AI in making procurement better, right?
Thank you for joining in, Nick and Simon. I'll also quickly introduce myself. So, Amit Lad here. I am a senior analyst with the sourcing and vendor management team at Everest Group. We focus on providing Fortune 500 organizations with research and advisory services across procurement, category management, supplier management, and also procurement technologies. Looking forward to having an insightful discussion today. And I will hand it over to Amy now to set the stage for us.
Sure. So let's kind of kick it off with where we are. It's already early February, 2025. Feels like it's been a long year already for some of us, but we're just beginning. And I think we've talked to a lot of CPOs, senior procurement leaders, vendor management or supplier management leaders. We've seen in the last, this was the 2024 data, but even increasing in the Q1 of 2025, increasing complexity, right? A lot of regulatory pressures, rising expectations, resources continue to be limited. There's a bit of a, cost savings still a priority, but a bit of a challenge between, meeting those kind of risk mitigation regulatory as well as cost savings. I think that we are in a place where agility is the differentiator, not anyone's supply chain or strategy, but the ability to switch around through different models of based on changes in your external environment, whatever those may be. So there's an increased focus, and I think we're up against as leaders a bigger challenge than we were in the past, regardless of your industry. What we want to really focus in on today is how AI and generative AI enabled procurement can help address those challenges. So there's many ways that we're seeing AI tools come up across different processes in the procurement function. I get asked almost every day, what are other companies doing? And I think it's a great opportunity with the two people we have here to hear from. Simon, one organization that BT Sourced, I think has been one of the power users in the market. And so interested to hear how, your perspectives from a practitioner perspective, and then from Nick, who's certainly been in a number of roles and with Zip Pioneer in terms of the service offerings out there, the tech offerings. So that's really where we're going to go today. We like to keep these interactive. I want to encourage the audience to ask questions in the chat. Use the comments section or the live chat on LinkedIn to ask things for this group.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you, Amy, for setting the context. So to kick us off, let's first talk about the key challenges that procurement practitioners are facing today. Simon, I would turn to you. So from your perspective, what are the biggest pain points that procurement teams are facing today?
Well, I think sort of Amy touched upon it in her introduction, right? So when I started in procurement sort of many years ago, it was a quite stable, quite predictable market where you could work long term with projects. And then you got sort of the perfect storm starting around sort of 2019, especially from the telco perspective. We got the sort of supply chain issues in all sort of directions. You got the sort of microprocessors, you got the semiconductors, then you got COVID, and all of a sudden people stopped traveling and everyone started working from home. So we needed to provide a lot more capacity. Then you have had several sort of conflicts, and as you mentioned, in especially in Europe, a lot more regulations coming into play also around AI, and it makes it a lot more challenging for sort of our procurement professionals to stay on top of everything that's going on. And on top of that, as you say, there's an expectation of them actually saving more money than they used to, in addition to sort of keeping up with the challenges in the supply chain and the changing regulatory market. So I think that it's the amount of things that's going on in parallel, which is the main challenge for the people on the ground at the moment.
Yeah, completely agreed. Because when we are also speaking with clients on this and trying to understand from them as to what is it exactly that they're spending most of their time on, then it is the firefighting. They have to deal with multiple issues that are coming across the organization. Spend visibility is low because of inefficient procurement operations as well. And I think that is where we will eventually go on discussing in our panel as well about how we can make it more efficient. So thank you, Simon, for your input on this. Nick, I would turn to you now to understand from a technology provider's standpoint as to what are the challenges that you see your clients facing when it comes to procurement operations. And apart from what you've discussed so far, what are the additional hurdles that you have noticed in their operations?
We see a lot of the same trends, and I think it's no surprise to anyone, because if you look at any study across any survey, you'll see the similar issues around either rising regulatory complexity and expanded scope. What I'd add to that, though, is if you take a step back and look at the root cause, it really goes back to what Simon was saying about the difference between the job 5+ years ago versus today, is that a lot of people are running an organization that is set up for that old job. And actually, the way the operating model is built and the technology stack around it hasn't caught up to the demands of today. So a lot of the research we've been doing recently has actually seen that when you push people to say, well, what is the root cause of that problem? They often identify that their processes sit in too many silos and they're not connected well enough with the stakeholders that they serve, or that many of these processes have manual steps in them that actually are required in order to get the processes to work, either between their own processes or across functions. And because of this, they actually have a lack of full visibility into the spend they're using, the data about the organizations they're working with. And so there's just this incomplete picture. But when you step back, it's really that the way organizations are set up is to manage that more stable, slightly more predictable job that used to exist 5 years ago. And I'll say this: when many of our clients at this point, we've done procurement orchestration deployments of 500+ times at this point. What many of our clients come to us and they have a greenfield landscape, or maybe they've just been coming into a role for the first time and they see what's being asked of them as the new leader. They look at the way the organization is set up and they put two and two together and say, we need to change in order to adapt to this new reality. So it's really that is the core root challenge, is actually the way that we operate in the past is not necessarily the way we can operate or need to operate in order to address these future challenges.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I've been in this space for a while and spent the last 5 years with Everest Group, but before that, 10 years doing procurement best practices advisory. And I think a lot of what I've seen is just kind of evolving of the same model that made sense 20 years ago. Even in that last 15 years, there's been a lot of new indirect procurement orgs. Like not every company had, every company had a CFO when they started, right? That's sort of a fiduciary thing that you have to have. But a lot of companies didn't have an indirect procurement org. They may have had, direct sourcing that, if they're a product company, but we were still seeing well into the early noughts, let's start looking at indirect spend. But there was kind of a formula for it. And I even look at some of the, process cost benchmarking, and it's very much based on a set of activities and the strategic sourcing process. It's all very linear, right? We think of it as linear processes. I don't think the world works in that way anymore. And it's not about necessarily keeping all of your people following a very linear process flow through and through, and everything has to check all these boxes. Still boxes that have to be checked. We talked about regulatory, but the way that people engage and the way that people think in the modern ecosystem of a company is so different that we really have to adapt the way that we work and the way that organizations are structured and the function is structured. And I think technology plays a big role in that. To pivot a little bit more to AI, it gives us a freedom. I know I'm a process flow thinker. I'm thinking system, I'm thinking from end to end. How is this going to work? But I like to browse folders. I don't like to search. I like to see it. That's not how some of these technologies work. We have to sort of shift and think about, how we do work in a new world. And I think that's why this is super interesting, but we see very different levels of adoption and ways of adoption across different companies.
Yeah. Just going a bit deeper into that,
Yes.
given that we have discussed about the challenges so far So Simon and Nick, this is a general question to both of you, as to how do you see procurement teams now leveraging AI-enabled procurement tools to overcome these challenges, whether it be inefficient procurement operations or it be about having a more collaborative approach to working with the business users and suppliers. How do we see AI being embedded into the procure tech stack now?
There's a lot of different ways you can look at this, and one I'll offer to start is I love that example Amy just gave, looking through folders versus search. The way we think about how people navigate processes or ask questions of procurement is starting to change very rapidly because just the user experience expectations are evolving very, very quickly. I'll give an example. We're talking about the way people were setting up indirect spend in the past, which for better or worse was very catalog oriented. It is very difficult nowadays when you're doing much more purchasing of things like software, maybe services around either specific contractors or working with third parties, to actually put a lot of that in a solid or more rigid catalog paradigm. And finding where to go or even what source of supply you need to go to is actually a big part of where a lot of these bottlenecks show up. People don't know which punch out I need to choose or which item I'm supposed to go to. And there's, this notion of guided buying is certainly not a new one. But as we see guided buying evolving today around this new AI paradigm, it's actually much more to Amy's point earlier about proactively guiding people. You can ask a question of AI and have it say, oh, it's this workflow you're looking for. Or as it collects information, it can fill out the purchase requisition for you. Or more general one, even just being able to answer a basic policy question. That is something that, someone in Simon's role or, working in the lower trenches of procurement is answering a question like, can I use a card for this or do I need a PO? There's a great study by Microsoft a couple of years ago on this, on the benefits and potential of AI, that showed basically that when they looked at the suite of Microsoft Office tools, the balance of time where people spent most of their day was in places like Outlook or Teams, not in Excel or Word, or really the way they translated it, doing creative or impactful work versus just communicating back and forth. A lot of the drag in organizations and time wasted is actually just going back and forth. So just something we see in our own research is that most organizations start or spend most of their time in requesting and working with stakeholders in email, Teams, and Slack, phone calls still. That manual part is what one researcher I talked to says is you have to use tools outside of the tool to actually get the process to work. So actually there's a big benefit there in that AI can really give that specific time back, time that's not necessarily unproductive, but really, frankly, a little bit wasted when compared with the actual work that people should be doing during the normal course of their day.
That's really interesting.
But I think that if you follow up a bit on one of your initial points, and also around that sort of having a common platform to work on, it's one of the things we see is key. And especially one thing is in the sort of traditional procurement processes where it sometimes seems as a black box. And it's always good to open it up to see where the challenge is. But what we've seen is that this is especially important in more in the risk area, where you have several stakeholders who are all very concerned that we haven't talked to the supplier about the recent event, right? And then having that one platform where you can all see, you can all sort of follow the discussions we have with our suppliers, and without then sending out an email at the end of every day and saying, this is where we are, they are able to follow us. And the other thing is that what we have seen is that it's not really about getting information, it's about summarizing information, right? So one thing is getting all the information in, but more importantly is sort of boiling that down to what does this actually mean for us? And it's where sort of generative AI is really a sort of massive sort of efficiency creator on sort of boiling down the information, because it's too much going on at any point in time, right?
Yeah, Simon, I think you made two really great points there in terms of what technology can bring to us. One is this idea of collaboration, right? It's really, we used to talk about collaboration tools for suppliers in terms of innovation, and I think those are still there and that's important. But when you think about how we work, like Nick said, most of us spend most of our day in Teams or Slack or something, right? I know even if I, take the suppliers out of it, I work with a global team with clients. I have just getting Teams or Slack chat set up with the right people internally to be all on the same page with something so that you're informing everyone. Like that's an innovation that we didn't have 5 years ago. I mean, we had a bunch of messaging tools. We weren't using them as intensely as we do now in more of a remote global environment. When you add the suppliers in and consider that, for a lot of companies, I mean, from even a services standpoint, like 35% of your workforce is external, plus all your supply base. Like there has to be this kind of ongoing collaboration. And I think that thinking of tools as a way to keep everybody on the same page, and we see many different tools popping up that do that. That's a huge way to think of procurement rather than that lateral flow. It's how do we all have access to the same information in real time as we need it. And then obviously the what AI brings us, the ability to digest a lot of information, because we all know that there's more out there than our brains can handle in the work hours that we have, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Amit. I think you were going to say or ask something.
No, so Simon, you raised another interesting point regarding having a centralized platform to have that complete visibility into all the communications and activities going on in procurement, right? So my question to you on this would be, uh, how is BT sourced enabling to get all that information from disparate systems into one single place? And how do you use AI and automation to enable that?
Well, we use AI and automation everywhere, and so it's more but one of the things which I think is still a challenge is what you mentioned. How do you get all the information in one place? I think that we have sort of seen, at least our experience is that there are sort of a lot of best of breed tools that are really, really good at what they do, and they're really good at sort of running processes for that specific area, right? So we are still sort of using several. We don't use one suite for everything, right? We use different tools for different sort of settings. So we have one sourcing, where we have multiple sourcing tools. We have sort of one risk platform, but what we do is that we run all the processes in those tools. So at least if you want to know the status of the sourcing activity, you can just go in and check it. If you want to know what we're doing on the latest sort of things that is happening around the sort of different trade barriers that might come up, we have one place where you can go in and see where we have collected all the input, what actions we have taken, which suppliers we've been talking to, right? But I think what you're bringing up is maybe one of the things that we need to see as a next step. How do we sort of bring all of that together? We have used a bit of in-house development on utilizing Gen AI to sort of sum up, but you always struggle to find the right detail level, and you would need to have a summary and then sort of dig down into the details needed. And I don't know if you will ever sort of get there when it comes to, because there are different users who need different level of information. So I don't think you would ever get that you have one platform that provides everything, because at the time you have developed that, there is something else on the market which is a lot better that you then need to add on top. But it is, for us, is at least be super clear on what processes goes where, and then we try to take out the key points and highlight them in a common dashboard.
Got it. Yeah, that's interesting. So now that we talk about this, I would also want to mention the newest kid on the ProcureTech block, which is procurement intake and orchestration. I think that is something which is capturing imagination of all the procurement executives when it comes to gaining that sort of visibility and a handle on various data points that is spread across the organization. So Nick, I know that Zip is doing a lot of interesting work in this space. if you could throw some light on how you are enabling organizations in doing that.
Yeah, so you mentioned the data point, and it's a really valid one because if we step back even 5 years ago, we think of things like contracts and how to get info out of really any document. That all was much the area of specialized providers. And my past role, I was VP of Research at Spam Matters, looking at a lot of these things. I was responsible, back in the day for contracts, and I remember when people were pitching for the first time, everyone, in the top right of those quadrants was saying, I have AI for contract data extraction, but you had to go to a specialist for that. And actually the setup for many of those tools was a multi-month process to actually get that to work with varying results. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. Increasingly today, things like contract metadata extraction, clause extraction is relatively commoditized, and that happened very, very quickly. Just in our example, we are not today viewed as like a contract lifecycle management platform or an orchestration platform, but we have relatively mature capabilities around document data extraction, not just for MSAs and SOW, but also for other documents like a SOC 2 or order forms and other specialized things. That all came much faster just because of the advancements that are available to us today, and also just being a more modern platform. But then if you take that one step further, the ability to extract data and then get that data pushed into other systems. This is going back to a lot of the root challenges. We don't have good data, or you're manually keying in or moving data around between systems. With intake and orchestration today, you can not only get the data faster and more rapidly review and have that validated, but then also surface that data where it needs to go. And this is a key point to understand, really, is like when I look at the interest in intake and orchestration more broadly, procurement executives are excited for themselves, but also because really when they're going to their peers, in contracting, in legal, or they're going to their peers in security and risk, they're saying, hey, I have something that's not going to make just my life better, but actually make all of our lives better. Because, one of the things we see in the research data points is that efficiency improves in the procurement cycle when you take this kind of approach, but actually the cross-functional review and approval efficiency goes up for those partner functions as well. So a lot of what we're seeing just, in that one example is using AI, not just as a guide, but really as a tool to get better data and then help get that data in front of the right people at the right time so they can work better and more effectively with procurement. Because, and then this is how I would cap off this point, is very much the scope and complexity challenge of procurement is because so much of this work is both strategic, but also much more cross-functional in nature. You can't just live in that silo anymore. And AI actually has a really big role to play, in our view, actually enabled by orchestration, to get that data to the right place at the right time to help people make better decisions.
Got it. Yeah. You did touch upon what is one of the prerequisites to having, implementing AI and Gen AI on a scalable level, which is data. But apart from data, do you see that organizations come with certain sense of process maturity or technology maturity, or even the skills that their teammates have in the procurement team, which helps them to adopt AI-enabled technologies easily in their procurement tech stack?
Oh, absolutely. And I'd really say it's the process understanding more than maturity. It's like the visibility and understanding of where the process is today. Because let me give an example. Just if you look at general innovation trends and adoption of what we'd call like general purpose technologies, many people think of AI as more of a general purpose innovation, like Steam or the internet in a way. It's really a platform or a paradigm shift. But in any kind of technology of that scale of importance, the major factor in whether or not it gets adopted actually is its ability to be integrated into current processes without necessarily having to upend the way other people are working. So if I take AI as an example, you cannot just implement AI within procurement only and expect that any downstream effect it might have on another function, legal or compliance in the example I was giving earlier. If it changes the way they work, then you have to also change the way you're going to make sure that you get the change management for them to adopt the new part of the process as well. And that involves, going back to the question, the prerequisite really is, do I understand the full scope of the process, including all of the stakeholders who are needed to actually execute procurement end to end? a lot of where our implementation scoping and time is spent in deploying Zip, which is typically, let's say like a 16-week exercise, is actually on process design and consulting. And a lot of our POV on this, again, having done this hundreds of times for organizations doing global deployments, is that you don't necessarily need to have a fully mature process or a fully baked one. In fact, much of the process is going to continue to change. Look at regulatory changes, DORA in the UK, German Supply Chain Act, even stuff that's happening in around AI in many jurisdictions. The process is necessarily flexible and needs to adapt over time. So it's not that you need to have it fully baked in a fully mature process, but you actually just have to have an understanding of where the process is today and where you want it to go. That's the more important prerequisite, so that you can continue working on it over time. I see one last point here is that I see a lot of people delay or drag their feet on some of these technologies because I want to get my process right. I don't want to automate a bad process. I think it's a little bit backwards in that as you go through a lot of this work, you will uncover more inefficiencies and you'll never get it perfectly right ahead of time. Starting is actually a little bit more important than getting all your ducks in a row first, because those ducks are going to get blown away by the wind, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think that's super interesting. I do want to throw in a question, and this is maybe a little bit more for Simon. And in context, I was facilitating roundtable last week with a bunch of procurement leaders, and topics they wanted to cover were Gen AI and procurement and upskilling and talent. And then the first person said, I said, all right, let's put those in order, start with one. The first person said, well, really, those are the same topic, because how do you upskill people unless you have a Gen AI strategy? And I was like, good point, but no one in the room was really heavily using Gen AI yet. And I think that, there's the both, how do you train people on Gen AI and how do you decide what is going to be people and what is going to be AI driven, right? Given that BT Source has gone down the path, I'd love to hear, how do you address the people side of this, right? How do you get your team ready? How do you get the skills in place? How does that all fit in? Because this is a big shift, right? And change management is often the hardest.
Yeah. So yeah. Of course, it's a big shift, and of course, it's a big change. But it's also sort of, you have to be. So what we needed to do was that we needed to accept the sort of cost of being early, right? You're not going to make it 100% right the first time, and you can of course sit back and wait until everyone else figured it out and then just jump on that train, but then you're too late. So you need to just accept that we will make some mistakes. You need to accept that there will be quite a lot of people who want 100% buy-in to everything you do, but it's worth it. And as you also see, and as is getting quite obvious internally, is how the people who utilize the technology gets ahead, right? Mm-hmm. And you can just look around you and see that the people around you are more efficient. They get to more things done, and by that they get more exposure and all of that. And it's like, okay, what is the difference between what I'm doing and what they're doing? Yeah, they utilize technology, right? And so it's a strategy of sort of putting in front, making it available. And of course, we do a lot of upscaling formally, but the main thing is for people to just see their peers around them becoming more efficient and sharing those experiences. I think that is what we have seen as the most efficient, right? Because we can write policy documents and training manuals all we want, but it's learning by doing, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, people are people, right? It's peer pressure and all of the policy and process on paper. It's sometimes, seeing that others are doing it.
Positive peer pressure here, right? Because it's not a downside, right?
All the cool kids are doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. Simon, I know we've talked a little bit about some of what you've been doing, but can you give some more examples maybe of how AI-driven solutions are really aligning with some of the things that the challenges that you mentioned earlier? Like, what did you bring in? Where do you start? What has worked?
Yeah, so I think that for us, as like any sort of procurement organization, we are process driven, right, from the get go. So we started off by saying, okay, what are all the things we do in a procurement process, from sort of the engagement with the business through sort of the sourcing activity, the market research, the risk assessment, the sort of performance management, all the way to payment, right? So we map up all of that, and then we saw what do we think are the best solution to solve parts of that. And that is also what I said. We didn't go for a sort of sweet solution. We went for a best of breed solution. So we believe that we have the best sort of solution for us when it comes to spend analytics, and it's not connected to anything else, right? We believe we have the best sourcing tool, and it's not connected to our P2P system, right? And so on. And that is because the development, when you buy sort of, or the beauty of buying sort of the new sort of SaaS solutions is that you're basically, yes, you're buying a solution, but you're mainly buying a development pipeline, right? So you're developing with your provider, with your tool provider. And the way that so we have been early in some of the sort of one of the early customers for several or our truth provider. And then you can also see how that gives us an opportunity to actually influence the way that these solutions are developing, right? And you're also part of a larger group of companies that are all trying to achieve the same thing. Another thing that we started to do early was that telling all our solution providers and tool partners, saying that don't look, sort of, we got all of them together and say the people around you are not your competitors, they're your partners, right? Because we believe that all of you should be in a sort of ecosystem where you can all work together. And then coming back to sort of how data flows from one system to another, sort of encouraging sort of APIs that makes it possible for us to sort of push our data from one solution to another, makes it possible for us to continue that strategy. If you're trying to sort of gather your own data in your own system, we're going to be forced to replace you because it's too chunky for us to do the sort of end-to-end process. So one thing is sort of the discussion around orchestration is one thing, but you can also do quite a lot by sort of actually getting direct flow of data from one system to another.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, sort of, you can never cover everything. So then we also decided to have an in-house team of sort of data scientists and data engineers on top of that, because there will be some gaps. Either that there isn't gaps between the sort of different tools, that is not like a perfect sort of ecosystem where everyone narrowly defined covers one or two processes, right? It's a bit overlap and sometimes there's a hole. Mm-hmm. So we have sort of an internal team who sort of fill those gaps or sort of develop things that is very specific for us as a company or us as an industry, where we haven't really found the solution. And the good thing about developing it yourself, you can also then be quite open again to our sort of technology partners and say, we made this. We think you should have made it, but we had to make it. Yeah. Here it is. We're not going to tell you how we did it, but at least here it is. That this is something we think that you should also do, right? And we proven you to that it was possible, and we did it in-house with a couple of guys in the corner, right? So that is also being open about what we're trying to do, because it will benefit us if all of us, right? If we're sort of being open about where we believe that the big challenges are and where we believe that we have an edge.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially the kind of collaboration across different suppliers and looking at it end to end, and really acknowledging across them where are the holes and where's the overlap. I think that's a level of sophistication in building the tech stack for your organization that many companies are lacking. Nick, I know you've been in the as deep in this for well, you're younger, but maybe not as long, but for a long time. And I think that so many companies start, so many procurement leaders start with, hey, we're just going to do an end-to-end suite, and that's going to solve the world hunger for every problem we have. Or they're like, we have this, it's not doing what we need, and figuring out the gaps in the strategy is really a challenge. And they're kind of plugging in, I'm all for best of breed. I think there's amazing best of breed solutions out there, but really not understanding the what goes in where kind of formula there. I'm going to turn it to Nick in a second. I do want to pause and just for anyone who's joining, because I know we have a lot of people from all over the world, and I see the comment, people, process, technology. Totally agree. That was actually something I was going to say about everything Simon said. It's not the technology. Like, the technology has to be there, right? But it's also the people that get you there. That's a great point from Jonathan. Also want to pause. Thank you for everyone who's joining, and let you know that there'll be a link at the end if you want to have a conversation around procure tech, AI, process orchestration tools, a lot of the other kind of new tools out there. Please click the link at the end, or click the link in the chat. Thank you for our team for putting that back there. We love having these conversations with others, and we're always releasing new research. So back to the regular question set. Nick, did you want to comment on anything? I think you were getting ready to say something a second ago.
Oh yeah, it's funny, right? Like I have not maybe been around working in this market for decades, but I have had the privilege of mentoring with a lot of people who have seen the beginning of this and even involved in. And what I will say, that I've learned and then experienced in my own career really is that there's always this pendulum swing. It's not a new concept in procurement or anywhere else between all-in-one and then best of breed and back and forth. And I think honestly, it's a little nauseating after a while. You watch it go back and forth, and you're like, I've seen this show before. What I really hope as we get into this new era around both AI and orchestration, which in my view are really inextricably linked in the way you actually deploy them, is that we find an appropriate middle ground. Because at the end of the day, you should be really focusing on the things that drive the step change improvement. So, a central platform to run or orchestrate the process, we've often found, is that middle ground, rather than saying, I only want to, manually connect all of my best of breed tools, or I want to do everything in one place. It lets you have that in-between state where you're able to connect all those tools that you may be using. And also, for what it's worth, the tools that are involved in the process that are not procurement owned. Software purchase requires an ITSM review, a TPRM, or a GRC review. Those are things that, even if you have a full suite of everything from a best-in-class suite, those are not part of the suite anyway. So your process is still fragmented across multiple technologies. But what I really think is the benefit here is that as we start to think about this in a people, process, technology way, really, you think about it, really, the way that people operate their process today, the people are doing a lot of the manual intermediary steps and tasks that the technology can do. So I'd actually back a little bit and say, people think of this almost sequentially: people, process, then technology. As we look at the world of AI, and especially as we get to around the conversations around agency in AI and getting to that more agentic world, the lines between people and technology start to blur. Is the technology a person, or is it doing the role of a person? Same thing with process. The process, and I take this even from just the world of workflow, orchestration, and intake. If you are able to govern the process more proactively and dynamically, the role of a person in that process to guide or explain, what actually needs to be done, then the process itself also becomes technology. It's also, I've heard people say it as, governance or process as code. So I'm not saying that technology supplants everything, but actually it really starts to become infused in the people and the process in a way where each of the three is inextricably linked and they can't be decoupled increasingly. So figuring out how they all work together, that is actually the challenge of either a new deployment or improving a current state. Is they have to all work in concert and actually push and pull with one another increasingly.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. you know, for the pendulum swing, there's a lot of pendulums that swing in the business world, right? Centralized, decentralized, onshore, offshore, in-house, outsourced, you know, tech people, sweet, best of breed. Someone told me way back, because I've been frustrated by, like, hey, we've been here before. 5 years ago, we said the same thing. Somebody phrased it like, every time you kind of shift from one model to another, value is created. It forces you to reevaluate and find ways of value creation. And I think as we look at this shift, whether it be, you know, hey, we've got a suite and we're looking at best of breed, or we're all best of breed and we're looking for, you know, how we harmonize that with orchestration or something like that. Or it's more of like, how do we harmonize the people aspect and what they're doing and infuse AI to get to what you described, Nick. I think that the process itself of thinking through these things is where a lot of the value comes from. And when we think of it just as a tactical one piece by piece decision, that's not really enough. This stuff is all interconnected, and it requires an ongoing, you know, ongoing activity to really get better at it.
Actually, on the pendulum swing, so AI in procurement has been a topic which everyone has been talking about for a long time. Like even robotic process automation was something which was being leveraged by a lot of organizations to help them increase the productivity of their executives. But generative AI's introduction definitely pushed the envelope for AI again, right? So Nick, this is something which I wanted to ask you is about uh, so the concern around AI, which a lot of organizations have, or skepticism, is around trust. So how do you ensure that the AI recommendations that your tool is providing are reliable and unbiased at the same time?
It's a great and a very relevant question, and it's been really instructive for me internally at Zip to watch how we've built and deployed this with customers, because obviously it's a very engineering intensive effort. We take pride in our engineering being world class. You know, we have people who have been alumni of places like Airbnb, Meta, Google, running our AI lab, but the people I think that's been just as almost like maybe slightly more impactful in delivering the beneficial and delightful experiences in AI has actually been our design team. Because really, when we look at how this works with customers, the feedback loop we get from them is really, I want to produce an experience that is fully trustworthy, and that needs to be designed in a few different ways. I mean, first of all, we need to accept and realize as an innovative and new frontier technology, AI doesn't always get it right. In fact, especially as we do kind of the iterative deployment of these, we're seeing increasingly that you can't just let free reign any kind of response go into AI. You have to guide people towards the ones that are more appropriate for AI to answer. And then when AI doesn't have the right solution, it needs to be able to admit, I'm not necessarily sure you should go here. And building that trust and saying, well, it's not this utopian all-knowing thing, but being able to have graceful fallbacks has been a big learning for us. But then also figuring out how to deliver that experience. And you see this even with chatbots that people interact with. Maybe I'll take an example of the ones you might interact with to change a flight or something like that. They're figuring out very, very quickly that guiding people into certain channels that can then produce the back and forth of different conversational questions as a way to actually deliver a faster experience is key to this. Is like what is the time to resolution here? But then also the trust on the bias part. I think this is a really important point, is that we, again, from a design-led experience, we take great pains to not try to push AI in places that people don't feel like that AI should be making a decision or acting right now. And I'm always reminded of the quote from IBM that a computer can never be held accountable. Therefore, a computer must never make a management decision. And a lot of people, have been very afraid, frankly, to say, we shouldn't let AI have the reins on fully, making necessarily an approval or a risk decision. We should have it be, and Simon made this point earlier, summarizing information so that we can make a decision, or alerting people to a potential risk so that it can be evaluated. But ensuring that AI isn't being given free rein to do or act in a way that, it can't be held accountable is a really key point of figuring out where in the process and how it should be effectively deployed so that people can make better decisions, maybe more quickly, but not giving up that autonomy yet. So it's really about the design of the experience and the intentionality of where it's deployed, where it can be trusted today.
Got it. Yeah. Uh, that's very interesting because you again focus on how important people are in these operations. The human intervention is still something which is very crucial to take those judgment calls as to what is it that we need to do with respect to a particular supplier, or whether it be about building those action plans when a certain supplier is not able to meet those level of compliance, etc. I'm interested to hear from Simon as well on this as to how they are ensuring uh, that the AI and human collaboration is in tandem when it comes to operations across BT.
Well, I sort of think that in the same sort of you always need to make sure that the decision is made the right place, and that doesn't matter which if one of the people is or one of the sort of inputter to the process is a machine or a person, right? You would always need to make sure that the right decision is done at the right place and that that person or group is accountable for the outcome. And that doesn't really, I'm sort of less, sort of still, you can say, yeah, machines make mistake, but they usually makes less mistakes than humans. So it's, yes, I get the fear, but it's not that we're going to let people completely lose in our systems. Why we would do that with machines? So I don't think it's that that big of a problem when you sort of look at it in the same way as you would with people, right? One of the things is how do you make it work in tandem is a bit back to what works for people, and is basically when they see that tasks they're either not very good at or find very boring can be done by a machine, they're going to do it, right? And then anyone who works in procurement would not leave negotiation or stakeholder management or any of those like key tasks to a machine, because that's why they got into the business in the first place. So it's, yes, let people do what they like, and you get there, right? Because if you started as a procurement manager and you don't like sort of negotiation, or you don't like the sort of aligning on scopes or getting sort of good sort of strategies, you choose the wrong business, right? And then you let the AI handle the more sort of tedious process related tasks. And if you go a bit back to that sort of process discussion, it's interesting because so procurement is a very process based industry, right? We know our processes are 6 or 7 step processes and everything has to fit into our templates. But one of the things you see with the introduction of AI is that the processes doesn't have to be linear, right? You don't have to do things in a specific order that you always did. And that is when you really talk about change management and you talked about it, how does this influence the rest of the business? That's one thing. But how does that sort of mess with the procurement manager's head when you suggest to not do things in the sort of according to the process? That is also a challenge because there's huge opportunities of actually not sort of killing the process, but really make it a lot more efficient by it doesn't have to be a linear line like it was. And again, if you think that way of thinking came about also because that was how the systems were built. So sometimes technology come first, right? So we build the processes we did also around the systems that was available at the time who had a very linear logic. And that doesn't need to be like that anymore. Hence, we can be more creative when we design our own processes.
Got it, yeah. And this linearity, again, I think is one of the reasons why a lot of procurement executives have to spend time doing tactical activities and are not able to focus on strategic matters at their hand. Like, let's say, creating category strategies or even enabling the suppliers to create mutual value. So, is this something that you have seen happening with AI's adoption in your procurement tech stack? Have the procurement executives got a lot of time back by not having to focus on the tactical side of the house?
Well, the executives didn't do that much tactical work anyhow, and they're probably not the best adopter of the technology either, right? But what we see is that yes, it allows them to do, as we talked about before, is about the pre-read can be done a lot faster due to the support you have with sort of the generative AI, and you are able to collect information a lot faster so that you can get that interesting strategic decision instead of spending a lot of time researching the details, right? So that is there. But I think the main sort of gain is really at the more sort of the more tactical level further down the chain, right?
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, one other thing which I was keen to ask you, Simon, was so given that BD Sourced is very much advanced in this process now of implementing AI and automation across the Procure tech stack,
Yeah.
what would be that uh, one thing which you would like to tell someone who is getting started on this journey, and how should they build the business case for these emerging technologies to be used in their Procure tech stack?
Well, it's a bit back to what I said initially, that you will never be ready, right? So you just have to sort of jump in and see if your organization is learning how to swim. And so that's one thing. The other thing is that data is gold, right? So the way you're sort of inputting your data, the way you're storing your data, the way you're making your data accessible, the way you're making it sort of standardized across platform is really going to make that job so much easier, right? Because a lot of the things that we do, yes, you can sort of get all the data scientists in the world, but they still need to work with the data you have, right? And yes, it's a lot. They can deal with a lot more unstructured data than what your traditional sort of analyst could. But at the same time, you still need to have a really strong understanding of your own sort of data pool, right? And if it's unstructured, that's okay, as long as you're aware of it. And then you need to sort of work from that perspective, right? And then build on top of the things you already have, not try to recreate everything. Your AI solutions isn't there to replace something that you have necessarily. It's there to make it more efficient, right?
Got it. Yeah, that's very helpful, Simon. Uh, and I think one other thing which we have already talked about. So, Nick, you mentioned about how agents can start being seen more often in a procurement tech stack. Uh, just wanted to hear from you as to where do you see this going ahead, and are AI agents going to completely replace the procurement professionals, or is it something which will just enable them more to focus on the value creation for businesses?
Yeah, I certainly don't think they're a full replacement for people. I think it's actually more so the operating model of a procurement organization, going back to the very beginning of this conversation, will adjust to emphasize the role of agents in enabling people. You can think of it this way, is that the current, or let's say maybe about to become past model that is very top down and siloed or insular becomes flatter, and people, again, we're talking 3 to 5 years out. Remember, 5 years ago we didn't have chat or Claude or any of this. It becomes much flatter and about managing the operations of various agents that are connected to the different systems. And it was said another way, the skill focus becomes on management of outcomes and management of different technologies in order to enable those outcomes. And I think people, going back to the earlier point about, AI shouldn't necessarily be making management decisions, become instrumental in evaluating the work and the potential conclusions or recommendations of systems. And that makes them much more strategic. And that, even just see in the last week, we've seen deep research come out from OpenAI and people talking about the ability to produce entire market research reports on, technology categories, or cross, basically meta studies of different medical reviews all in one place and actually come up with genuine recommendations or insights on that. If you do apply that to procurement, just category research becomes much, much faster. And it really is about controlling a series of agents that can do those kinds of things, but then provide those insights and then create a course of action, and then being, I guess, in the orchestration analogy, the conductor that makes those things happen. But it's really about, again, a key part of this point, is important one, the structure of the procurement organization and how we design the skills and role. Those shift in response to AI rather than AI coming in and just doing those jobs. Because the way AI works and thinks, I say that very lightly, is not the same as a human. To borrow the words of Ethan Malik at Penn, like it's a more foreign or almost kind of creepy, different kind of intelligence. So, the phrase there is a co-intelligence versus a replacement intelligence.
Got it. Yeah. This is something which will help everyone provide clarity on how should they envision their procurement tech stack evolving. Thanks a lot for the insight on agentic AI, Nick. Over to you, Amy.
Yeah, I think we're getting to the top of the hour, and we appreciate your time, and especially everyone who's joined. To kind of wrap it up, we've covered so many things, but one thing that each of you would advise procurement leaders that they should be doing to prepare for the AI-driven future, prepare their teams, prepare their tech stack. Any one top of mind thing that you want to wrap up on? Nick, we'll let you go first.
As people look to this future, it's still evolving, and you see new capabilities released every week. I think that the simplest recommendation you can make that would probably have the most impact is, you can get drowned in all this new information, these new things. I would appoint in your organization one person to be like an AI czar and just say, spend even 5 to 10 hours a week on this and just figure out what's going on, keep track of it, and report back to us. But then also put a point person on it. I guess in the Silicon Valley world, we use DRI, or directly responsible individual. Like, AI needs a DRI on your team, because without someone who's going to be figuring out and watching this, you're going to be left behind just by the sheer volume of work, going back to the beginning conversation, that you're expected to do with this scope. So put someone on it and have them start giving recommendations, and hopefully that will help drive, bit by bit, your adoption of this technology as it can become more mature.
Great point.
Yeah, I think I've been sort of touching a bit upon it, that sort of you just need to start this journey, because you would never sort of design your way to the perfect place of beginning. The other thing that we've seen is that technology develops very fast, so don't sort of build everything around your one solution that is going to save you, right? Because like just down the line, something else comes up. So you need to be able to be flexible in your tech stack in a different way than what we're used to. We're not talking these like 2-year implementation journeys. You're sort of finding what works for you for a specific task, and then you implement that, and then you assess sort of the rest of you. It's a different way of thinking about technology, and that isn't as process driven, and that is a challenge, but it's also a lot of fun.
All right. I think with that, we'll wrap up. Anyone who's listening, thanks again for joining in on LinkedIn. This is recorded and streaming, and will be replayable as well. There should be a link in the comments if you want to have a conversation with our analysts. Please feel free to request that. And Nick and Simon are both on LinkedIn as well, and I'm sure would welcome the outreach for anyone who wants to chat with them. Really appreciate your time. This very interesting conversation, and we look forward to seeing how both BT Sourced and Zip evolve in the coming, the rest of 2025.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Simon.